Hello, everybody. I have a very interesting episode for you today. In this episode, I cover two listener questions. The first one is from somebody who missed out on a lot of their development romantically and when it comes to dating because of some things that they were going through. And now they're a little bit older and trying to get into the dating scene, but it feels very intimidating. So we talk about all sorts of things related to that. The second question is about somebody that's struggling with borderline personality disorder in the UK. And in this question, the topic of suicidality and suicide attempts comes up. We don't talk about anything graphic or in detail, but I do use the term suicide and the term suicidality quite a bit in answering the question. So just be aware of that. But in this, we talk about kind of creative ways to perhaps get a higher level of care or a different type of care for BPD in this person's context. So I hope you enjoy. And let's get to it. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist and a self-help author from Southern California. My goal is to make mental health content for real people, just like you. And in this show, I answer your questions or dive deep into topics related to life, psychology, mental health, relationships, and more. Please be aware that sometimes I use some spicy language, and I also don't shy away from sensitive topics, but I will try to give you a content warning whenever it's relevant. So if all this sounds good to you, let's get started. All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is episode 386. Thank you for joining me today. As I mentioned, I have two listener questions. And as a reminder, if you want to leave me a question for the show or a topic suggestion or even feedback, you can shoot me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com, or you can go to duffthepsych.com and use the contact form there. There is a little link at the top where you can click on there and leave a message for me. You can do this through the text box, or you can also leave a voicemail if you ever wanted to do that. Either way, when I include questions on the show, I always keep you anonymous, but if you do include any identifying information in the question, of course, I'll read that for context. But yeah, hopefully you guys are doing well wherever you are. I really appreciate you being here. I am basically better. I had COVID last week. I mentioned that on the show, and I'm no longer positive. Kind of have some lingering congestion, so you may hear a bit of that in my voice and such. I'm trying not to clear my throat into the mic too much. I actually had to start this episode over because I was like clearing my throat every 3 seconds. And I'm like, this is going to be a nightmare to record, or to edit rather. So I'm giving it another shot here. But in terms of the bulk of, any really uncomfortable symptoms, those are past, and I got pretty lucky. It didn't hit me too hard. It just lingered in terms of testing positive for a while. So yeah, hopefully, you're not having the same struggles and, staying safe. As I mentioned, last episode, COVID is on the rise again, unfortunately. So if you're, compromised, if you're around people that are compromised, please be careful. Aside from that, let me just go ahead and get into the questions without too much preamble. Here's the first one. It reads, going to keep this as short and sweet as possible for you. I'm a 32-year-old male, recently diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Really shitty childhood with addict parents, both have passed away. I spent close to a decade extremely isolated while abusing alcohol, and let's be real, anything else I could get my hands on. Got clean 4-ish years ago, started meditating, running a ton, working out, going to therapy, and was recently put on Wellbutrin. I think all of these things are helping, though I do still have those days. Back in what I refer to as the dark time, I told myself I didn't want love or romance and that I was happy being alone. Bullshit, denial, etc. Now that I'm seeing more clearly, I realize I desire love and intimacy deeply, so deeply it hurts. And I'm sad for all the time I wasted when I should have been dating, experiencing, and experimenting to figure out what it is I like and want. I'm trying to enter into the dating scene, but my inexperience causes me so much anxiety and insecurity. I'm so afraid of being rejected or bad in bed. And to top it all off, I'm not even sure about my sexuality. I've only been with a couple women and have been having increasingly bi-curious and gay thoughts. I've come to accept the idea that I may be bisexual, and I have a great support system that would love me no matter what, though the thought of coming out still does scare me. I just want love and eventually a family, man. I'm looking for any tips and or words of encouragement. Tell me it's not too late. Thanks for all you do. Yeah, thank you for this question. Before diving into it, I just want to congratulate you on all of your hard work and progress. You have certainly been through quite a bit of life in your 32 years. And any progress that you've made is well-deserved and hard-won. I don't blame you for, the past that you've had with struggling with substances and mental health, given what you've had to endure and go through. And I hope that in your progress, you've come to a place of starting to give yourself some grace and forgiveness for some of that as well. I know that can be a really hard part to, kick and get rid of, but yeah, it's no wonder that you had some difficulties. So have some grace with yourself. One other thing I want to point out from your question is in the first part, you mentioned that you've been in therapy, meditating, exercising, and using medication. All of those components are impactful on their own. Therapy, obviously, great for your mental health. Exercising has been shown in research to be very good for mental health. Medication is effective. All of those things in and of themselves are great, but you're an awesome example of how you don't have to be limited to just engaging with one of them. You could do any or all of them. And sometimes which ones you do change over time. You might be doing therapy and exercising for a while. You might be doing exercise and medication for a while, maybe just medication for a while. All of those are okay. So thank you for providing a good example there. Now, on to your actual concerns. It sounds like basically you're saying that while you've made a ton of personal progress, you feel like there was a period of development, especially romantic and sexual development, that you missed out on. And as a result, you're feeling both a yearning for connection and intimacy, as well as fear and anxiety about all of the unknowns. Then on top of that, you're feeling uncertainty about your sexual orientation, which just adds another layer of complexity. That is definitely a lot to sort through. And I don't blame you for feeling overwhelmed and scared about relationships and love and sex. It can be daunting for anyone, let alone someone who has been through the things that you have. But I want to promise you that it can be okay. I'm not going to promise you that everything is going to work out perfectly for you, that it's going to be, a fairy tale story or something like that, but you are far from hopeless. Far from hopeless. I've actually worked with a lot of people in situations similar to yours, where they're in their 30s or even later and feel like life has already passed them by. And that's kind of the vibe I'm getting for you, like you missed out on so much. But man, at 32, you are still so young. And this is coming from somebody who's 35, right? I understand the temptation to feel like, certain things are in the past already and, to have regret about those. But, in our 30s, we still have so much time. You have so much time, so do I, so does anybody listening to this who's in a similar boat. The thing is, it may not even take years and years to work your way to a place that you want to be. Realistically, if you're able to approach these areas that you want to explore rather than avoid them, you may find yourself in a very different place within, say, just a year's time. So there's opportunity here. I can see, though, that there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty about being good enough. And for many people that have struggled with addiction, it can certainly be a source of insecurity. Here's the thing, though. The fact that you've been able to face down your issues and work through addiction, I think is super attractive to many people. One of the biggest complaints that I hear in dating is people lacking self-awareness and not being interested in actually improving themselves. I'm sure you wish you could take back some of the years that it feels like you've lost, but don't forget that they are also a very important part of the journey that's made you into who you are now. As I said, I've worked with a lot of people in situations similar to yours, and one thing that I absolutely need to advise you about and caution you about is getting your perspectives on dating and romance from the internet. We all know that social media and the internet in general can give you an unrealistic portrayal of life. But I find that for men in particular, at least, I work with mostly men in the United States, but for men in particular, it can give you the wrong idea about who you need to be in order to find success in relationships. You're allowed to be inexperienced. You're allowed to be not the most skilled person in the bedroom or in dating. None of these are deal breakers. So be careful about assuming that you already know what somebody else is looking for in a partner or even in a hookup. We all have unique strengths and weaknesses, and we also have unique preferences. When talking about dating and sex, we hear the word performance thrown around a lot, but really, they should not be a performance. And you need to be cautious about falling too much into a performance mindset as opposed to a growth mindset, right? Performance means you're trying to look as good as possible or be as good as possible, be as impressive as possible at any moment. versus a growth mindset where really you're just trying to get better over time. And sometimes that means that you're not going to be the best. Sometimes you're going to be embarrassed or make a fool of yourself, but it's all in service of the end goal. But falling into too much of a performance mindset can really set you back when it comes to exploring and finding yourself. You will get rejected in dating. You will get ghosted. You will have times where you get no response at all. And that's good. You should have those things happen. As I mentioned in the last episode, it's not all about doing everything possible to make a relationship happen. It's about feeling out whether you're compatible with somebody, whether a relationship or whatever between you should happen. When it comes to sex, that performance mindset can also lead to things like erectile dysfunction or simply having a really poor experience because you're so in your head about doing what you think is a good job. Now, I want to talk more about this, but let me take a quick break and talk about our first sponsor. Okay, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the perfect sponsor for today, given that we're talking a lot about relationships and dating. Look, it's not always smooth sailing. Relationships can take work both between the people involved and internally. While we hear a lot about couples going to counseling once they're already in an established relationship, I think that we often don't give enough value to participating in individual therapy throughout the dating process. It can be an amazing place to work on communication, run things that have happened by a neutral party, and build that all-important self-awareness that we've talked about. So if you're thinking of giving therapy a try for any reason, try out BetterHelp. It's entirely online. It's designed to be suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and that will get you matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So whether you're working on a relationship with yourself or with somebody else, visit betterhelp.com/duff to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/duff for 10% off your first month. I want to reassure you that you are absolutely not the only person out there in the world starting to explore these things like dating, relationships, romance, sex, more in their 30s. There are a lot of reasons that somebody might be entering the dating scene a bit later than other people. Some people grew up in a very repressive or sheltered environment. Some people were super religious and not allowed to do anything like that. Some people had to work their asses off for their whole young life, and they never had room for romance or any time to learn about those things. There are many reasons, and you are absolutely not the only person out there in a similar boat. You're not a freak. You haven't done anything wrong. You're totally okay where you are. In some ways, you actually have a unique advantage. A lot of exploration when you're young can be blundering and messy because you're still going through so much personal development. For you, obviously, you're still finding yourself as a person and developing in certain ways, but you've also lived so much life already, and you learned a lot about yourself, presumably, in the process of healing and overcoming addiction. That's an awesome thing to bring into dating and relationships. A lot of people are frustrated by conversation in dating because sometimes it just goes absolutely nowhere. There just isn't a whole lot to the person that they're on a date with, no depth there. Now, you, of course, will need to learn how to be engaging without trauma dumping on dates. But man, I can't tell you how much of an advantage it is just to have some depth to you, some experience, and some appreciation, maybe even curiosity for the human experience. You have been broken down and built back up. And hopefully this means that you've become, more curious, like I said, about life and about people in general. That's such a good thing to be bringing into conversations. None of us really know what the fuck we're doing, right? We don't. We kind of pretend like we do, but none of us really know. So if you're kind and curious and engaged and you try to be self-aware, I think that'll get you very far. It's hard to do, but I would encourage you to try to get the end point out of your head when approaching these issues. By that, I mean, you can't be thinking about whether you're going to be able to get married and have kids when you're just on a first casual date with someone. So try to do that. And, like I said, keep those other things in mind and you'll be all right. You said that you've been meditating for some time now, and I wonder if maybe you have some mindfulness skills that you can actually tap into, just to feel present and focused on the here and now rather than obsessing over those long-term implications of everything. When it comes to dating, some of it is certainly conversational skill and personality, but some of it also just comes down to compatibility, things that you can't even fully explain, and that's just something that you're going to need to feel out. As you continue to explore, you will become more and more comfortable, and you will have the amazing opportunity to learn more about who you are in this context, right? This is a process of finding yourself and understanding more about yourself as a person who dates. You might have one idea about the kind of person you are in the dating realm, but as you go on dates and get actual experience and meet people, you may find that people actually gravitate toward aspects of you that you weren't even thinking about. And as with all things, practice helps. You will always be learning and developing. With my partner, my wife, I've been with her since I was 15 and I'm 35 now, and I'm still finding new ways to relate and interact with her. We go through different phases all the time. So yeah, that never stops, and you always get better and better and better. And this is also true of sex, right? The only thing that I think would make you bad, I'm using air quotes here, bad at sex, is being too narrow-minded about what it actually means, about what sex means, and being unwilling to learn about what works for you. Sex is a skill and it's an experience. There's certainly, a unique chemistry that happens between two humans or more, and sex can be so different from situation to situation because of that. And there are also things that you can learn about your biology, about your approach, about your techniques that can help you achieve what it is that you want to achieve in sexual encounters. So even if you're starting from a place that you may not be very satisfied with, that isn't necessarily what you're going to be stuck with. That just means that, there are things to experience, there are things to practice, there are things to learn, and that's okay. For the most part, people aren't as judgmental as you might think when it comes to sex. And if they are, that might mean that they're not the best match for you, right? So again, that's a compatibility thing. You don't have to make everything work. If somebody's an asshole, then you don't want to be around them. So, take some of that pressure off yourself. I mentioned social media and such before, but aside from simply not putting too much stock into what you see on the internet, I would also encourage you to curate your sources, right? You're going to be online. You're going to see things. And so maybe doing a little bit of work to clean up the sources and make sure that you're having good influences there could be helpful, because there are some really great accounts out there that focus on sex education, sex positivity, relationships, communication, even accounts that look at dating while sober. There's a lot of good stuff out there. There's just also a lot of hot garbage out there. So, you need to be careful about that, but it can be a good resource. I also want to address the other part of what you wrote about, which is your sexuality. You talked about not being sure where you stand in terms of sexuality, having more bisexual or gay thoughts. Totally valid, man. Totally valid. And I'm speaking to you directly, as a man who only openly stated that I'm queer within the past year. So I think it's 100% normal to be unsure about who you're attracted to and in what capacity. I think that you don't need to, rush into committing to a particular label if you don't want to. But at the same time, it's absolutely okay for you to be, internally certain about certain aspects of your experience, right? By that, I mean, you can know inside yourself that you are attracted to some men. Maybe you're not sure if you want to have sex with them or have any sort of physical intimacy, or you can just want to fuck all the dudes that are out there, but you can never imagine being in a romantic relationship with one. Or maybe it's just completely down to the particular individual and gender really isn't the most important thing to you. Whatever that might be, you can claim outwardly or not any of that, and that doesn't change the truth for you. So, don't feel pressured to do anything in particular, but also don't feel like you are unallowed to have these feelings or explore them or experiment. These things are way less rigid and clear cut as you might be made to feel. I've always, personally had some men and some non-binary people that I've been attracted to in my life. And I've always been, sort of hesitant or felt weird to call myself straight. But it's only within the past few months that I've even ever put anything other than heterosexual on a form that I've filled out. So it can take some time to sort of decide how you want to identify, but that doesn't mean that you have to deny your experience, I guess is what I'm saying. This is a parallel journey of exploration that you're going through, and I know it can feel like a lot to take on at once, but you don't need to pressure yourself to figure it all out. Part of the beauty is in exploring and learning. You are you, and now you're in a position where you can allow yourself to learn more about exactly what that means, about exactly who you are. So I'm very excited for you, and I want to encourage you to continue approaching rather than avoiding. That's served you very well so far, so continue doing that. And if you need to reach out for help again in whatever capacity, never be afraid to do that, right? Every journey is its own leg of that overall journey, and you might need a different type of help at a different period of time. So Don't be afraid to reach out, keep approaching, and you're going to do fine. Okay, before we get into question 2, let's take another break and talk about our second sponsor. Hola a todos, este episodio es presentado por Babbel. Hello everyone, this episode is brought to you by Babbel. Obviously, the best way to learn a language is to be somewhere that you can immerse yourself in it for an extended period, but many of us don't have that luxury. However, if you're like me, you've had learning a second language on your to-do list for quite some time. So let's make 2024 the year that we finally check it off the list with Babbel. Babbel is a science-backed language learning app that actually works. Their quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language learning experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Their tools are approachable and rooted in real-life situations, so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. I started off with a pretty good understanding of basic Spanish, so learning how to order from a restaurant or something like that isn't necessarily where I need to start. But with Babbel, I've been able to learn more about how to speak longer phrases in a fluent conversational sort of way. And the software also has technology to help me improve my pronunciation and accent with speech recognition. So if you'd like to join me in the language learning journey, you have a special deal as a podcast listener. Right now, you can get 50% off. That's 50% off. 50% off a one-time payment for a lifetime Babbel subscription at babbel.com/duff. That's 50% off at babbel.com/duff. And it's spelled BABBEL.com/duff. Rules and restrictions may apply. Okay, so on to question 2. It reads, I'm based in the UK. Mental health support is pretty awful here. I always thought I just had depression, but it had come to light about 20 years ago I was diagnosed with BPD, which means borderline personality disorder. After a brief period of relatively well-functioning, I've had a massive crash and have been actively suicidal, making several suicide attempts. This has led to me having DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy, with the local personality disorder team. This is ending, and even though I've recently made another suicide attempt, they're discharging me back to the care of the GP. So no support, basically. Meds do nothing for me. Because of my BPD diagnosis, which I didn't know about until recently, the mental health team won't support me, and I've just been told that this constant suicidal feeling is just normal and I have to learn to live with it. I just can't. I feel like the BPD is being used as a label of no hope, no help. I don't know what to do and I'm desperate. Many thanks. So thank you for your question. Very honest one. I appreciate that. I have no personal experience with the mental health system in the UK, but I have heard from a lot of people who have written into the show and in various contexts that it can be awful. And so I'm sorry that you've had such a hard time getting the kind of care that you deserve. I'm glad that you were eventually able to get a BPD diagnosis, because that does change the course of things. That's a whole different ballgame from just straight up depression. And what you're describing here is actually a pretty common pattern for somebody with BPD, having a nice period of stability and then this crash, as you described it, where things are extremely heightened and elevated and intense. You mentioned suicidality and suicide attempts. I'm sure you're aware, but this is also something that commonly happens in people with BPD, because it can all just feel like so much when you're in that place of being elevated. You feel like a raw nerve, and it can feel like there's no other option to get some relief. It's just very frantic. And yeah, it's a very common reaction to that. But I'm glad you're alive. I'm sorry that you've been hurting so much. Sorry that you've been driven to that point time and time again, but I'm glad that you're here to be able to write in this question. So let's dig into what you're actually talking about here. First, I'll address the last part of your message. You wrote that it feels like BPD is being used as a label of no hope. And that's so fucking real. I hate it. It's absolutely the truth that there's just a lot of discrimination against people with borderline, even amongst mental health providers. A lot of people will flat out refuse to treat people with BPD or to allow them to participate in therapy groups. And unfortunately, I can't provide a lot of perspective on what you will be able to do in terms of finding appropriate treatment in the UK, since I don't live there. I know that a lot of people have found more success with kind of private pay individual providers outside of the health system, but that obviously requires resources, and I don't know your situation. What I will say is that BPD is not an inevitable death sentence. It is something that can be treated successfully. That said, it is more difficult to treat BPD than many other mental health disorders, and unfortunately, a lot of providers just suck at it. A lot of providers are not good at treating BPD. So, your experience of being able to find relatively little help, unfortunately, is somewhat common. And I don't mean to be discouraging here, right? I know you said that, you feel like there's no hope, or it's, the label of no hope. I don't want to be doing the same thing. I'm not trying to discourage you, but you also don't need me to sugarcoat it for you, right? Your experience has been real, and you're not the only one who's been through this sort of thing. So I just want to try to provide my honest perspective as best I can. I've worked with people that have borderline, and in some cases, we've seen great success. DBT skills, and for anybody that's not aware, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, was made specifically for borderline personality disorder. It can be used in a lot of other contexts as well, but it has a lot of learning of coping skills and things like that to help you with emotional regulation and awareness. So in my experience, typically you only need to go through the DBT groups, once or twice maybe, to get all of those skills, learn your acronyms, get some back pocket skills that you can use to, regulate emotions when they come up, and, of course, the education component, learning about it. But from there, it's often better to work with an experienced therapist who, maybe has experience with DBT, and they can help you integrate the skills on a more individual basis. I also don't think personally that borderline just comes out of nowhere, right? Of course, there are various factors, but it could be that for you, rather than learning emotional regulation techniques and sort of the top level, you might need to move more toward depth work, digging deep into it and understanding the origins of your BPD. It's not always the case, but often in my experience working with people, it's very common that this involves issues stemming from childhood and often traumas that you've been through. And I'm not sure if you've had the chance to dive into that much, but if you haven't, you may want to be on the lookout for providers that have these sort of depth-based approaches. Like here in the US, we would say, somebody with, say, a psychodynamic or psychoanalytic approach would be in line with that, where they're definitely going to be looking at early relationships, formative experiences, and exploring those things that have, perhaps contributed to the development of your BPD. You mentioned that medications haven't worked for you, and this is common, right? We don't have medication that directly helps with the core issues of BPD. But for a lot of people, medication is a big part of the equation because it can help with the other stuff. It can help with the depression or the agitation, anxiety, the anger, things that are sort of the secondary symptoms of BPD. And of course, there are sedative medications, right? Things like benzodiazepines, your Xanax or Valium. These can be helpful for those moments of really intense emotions where it's like, okay, I'm going to hurt somebody, I'm going to hurt myself, or I'm going to, do something very impulsive that's a bad idea, whether that's, something like gambling or, overspending or something sexual or substance related, whatever. These medications can be helpful to be like, okay, I need to take the edge off and chill out, maybe go to sleep, that sort of thing. So, medications can be helpful. It's just that it doesn't address that core personality issue in BPD. But I would also like to point you toward other interventions. Again, I have no idea how things are working in the UK right now, but things like ketamine infusions or even psychedelic assisted therapy could be worth looking into. Please don't take the next things I say as medical advice, but I do think that in the coming years, psychedelics will be used more and more frequently in the treatment of personality disorders. Because when you think about it, right, a personality disorder is more than just symptoms. It's about the fundamental structure of how you understand and experience and relate to the world. And it's not so easy to reach in there and mess with that, right? Personalities are supposed to be something that is enduring. It's part of who you are. So how are you going to change that? And so when I think about it, how does one strip that personality down to the studs, so to speak, and work on reconstructing it? One way to do that is potentially with psychedelics. It's something that I've seen on a personal note that has worked for certain people. Obviously, I can't suggest that to you directly, but it's something that you may want to talk to qualified professionals in your area about, do some research about on your own, because you hear terms like ego death, for instance, when it comes to psychedelic experiences. And to be clear, this isn't like you can't just like pick any psychedelic and just like go ham with it and, hope to have a good experience. There's a lot of care that goes into, doing the work along with it. But in my opinion, it is one of the underutilized tools for, again, stripping down a personality and working on rebuilding it in a way that's a little bit more functional for the person. So yeah, I don't know what sort of resources you have to work with, but maybe if the UK is failing you in terms of mental health, it could be that you need to seek help elsewhere in the world, right? The internet has obviously made it much easier to interact with people from elsewhere in the world. When it comes to coaching or even therapy, you can have that with people from other places in the world online. And aside from that, if you think about it, people travel to other countries for medical procedures all the time. So I would say that it's totally worth considering if there is a good option there that you have access to that you would be able to make happen for your mental health. Switching gears a little bit, suicidality is common in BPD, as we've said, but I don't think that you need to settle for struggling with it every single day in the way that you are right now. You can absolutely be getting more support. Not to say that you're not, accessing your resources the way you should be, but you deserve to be getting more support, I should say. I think it's super inappropriate for you to be discharged back to your GP with no real plan for follow-up care. And so I'm not sure if there's any way for you or somebody on your behalf to petition this, but I would consider this to be not appropriate clinically, especially if you're still having suicidal attempts. And okay, it can be hard to discriminate these things, right? True suicidality from what we might consider suicidal gestures in BPD, right? When you are in a state of elevation in BPD, there are a lot of different ways that it can impact your behavior. And for some people, suicidality almost becomes a tool to use or a way to signal that they're having a really hard time, or as a way to get a reaction from other people. This is, it presents differently in different people, but that can be a part of it. So it can be hard to sort of discriminate and draw that line. But regardless, like if you just had an attempt, you're still in need of a higher level of care. You shouldn't be being kicked back to your GP. So I'm sorry, again, that you haven't been really treated the way that you deserve. My best advice here would be to push for more help in whatever way that you can, even if that means you need to go to a hospital to get a higher level of care for your suicidality, really whatever it takes. As well, I would have you go back and, review your materials from the DBT work that you've done. Try your best to review and to employ them. If you have family or loved ones that you can bring into the fold, please consider that as well. Even if that means you need to go stay with somebody else for a period of time, just for safety's sake. That's better than missing your opportunity to work through this because you're not around anymore, at least in my opinion. Just like all of the other storms in your life, you have the capacity to weather this storm. And in many cases with BPD, it is a matter of patience and waiting for things to return to a more normal baseline. But we need you to live in the meantime. And of course, aside from direct intervention, there are plenty of other things, right? There are support groups in person and online. The online part is great because you can access support groups from anywhere in the world. There are online communities of people that are struggling with similar issues. There are online courses, books, audiobooks, workbooks, any of these things that you can employ. A lot of them are free. Some of them you might need to pay for, but there's a lot of different tools out there. And the more you bring in, the more you might come across something that is helpful to you. I really wish that I could give you more direct advice about how to navigate your situation, but I do want you to know that you shouldn't have to deal with all of this on your own. And the current standard of living that you have, it doesn't have to be what you settle with for your entire life. My hope is that this response gives you some hope and that there's an alternative to what you're experiencing. And maybe this gives you a push to consider other avenues of treatment and getting creative if that's possible for you. So thank you a whole lot for the question. I really appreciate it. And that's it for the episode, everybody. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. If you would like to send a question or a topic for a future episode, please email me at duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you like my approach and would like to learn more about my books, online course, or other resources, please head over to my website at duffthepsych.com. And lastly, it would mean so much to me if you would leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to it, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, you got this.